Welcome. Okay, we are here again for another Deity chart myth stream, and thank you for joining again, Arno. So we are going to try to continue our discussion of the Soma type deity, and last time we laid out a series of pretty complex connections. There's sort of layers of equivalencies that you have to put together and understand in order to get to the next parallel. So I'm just going to try to summarize what we touched on last time. So basically, we have we have this story of Chavana and Dumisil. This whole series of connections began with Georges Dumisil, realizing that Chavana helping the Ashvins to confront and fight Indra, the king of the gods, so that he could help them join the Soma sacrifice of the high gods. Dumisil realized that this is the same template, the same essence of the story as the what was called the Aesir Vanir War of Norse mythology, with um, Njordr and his son Freyr and their associated um, deities, whoever was with them as the Vanir, fighting against the high gods, the Aesir, led by Odin, of course, and with including Thor, the Thunderer. So you have in Georges Dumisil's concept, the Ashvins are the epitome of the third function. So the producer caste there, you could call them uh, um, Vaishya. The third function would connect to the produce of any kind of producer role in society, and so they stand for this quote unquote lower than the aristocracy caste. And that was part of the issue with why the Ashvins couldn't join the high sacrifice of the more noble gods. The other gods saw them as consorting too much with normal people, with lower people, and so therefore they were less aristocratic. They were less pure in a sense, less high class, and they had to prove themselves. They had to overcome Indra, and Chavana, this seemingly random sage, helped them to do that and was able to overcome Indra. But Dumisil showed that this parallels the Aesir Vanir War, and that Njordr and Freyr can be seen to have this more producer role, and it's complex because any god can also have a sovereign role. Freyr has connections to sovereignty. They can all any human lineage of kings would be happy to trace themselves from any given god in different circumstances. So it's not so simple as to say that Freyr and Njordr are simply only connected to lower functions, especially in Norse mythology. These associations can shift to Thor is associated with lower functions, with producer roles, with producer humans. And so Dumisil goes into this in his writings, of course, and he suggests that there was a bit of a shift in how the castes were associated, but nonetheless, underlying this, we're looking at the underlying motif that would go back to Proto-Indo-European. He argues that this is the same motif, especially when you have what I described last time, which is the creation of this embodiment of the mead or soma, which is created in both versions, and then divided in 4 or 3 parts in both versions. So you have Kvasir, created by all the gods after the Aesir Vanir War, and he ends up being divided, cut apart, and his blood becomes the mead itself. And then you have Chavana creates the monster or the demon Mada in that version, and different parts of him are associated with different sort of destructive tendencies and effects of intoxication, things like that. And Mada means intoxicating or mead. It's connected specifically to that, the intoxicating power of the mead. So he just argues that these are the same myth, and so this was a jumping off point for the next set of things, because it seems clear that this Chavana, he can't be just a human. He's the one, the gods, the Ashvins need him to help them. He is able to overcome Indra himself, the king of the gods. It makes no sense that this is, he is, even if in the story he is a human, he has drawn into himself divine power beyond the gods. He is, you could say, an incarnation of a god. And so the question is, what story underlying that? What god is that underlying the story of Chavana? And it seems clear that Chavana also parallels Njordr in his role in the myth, and Njordr is clearly a god once again. Then, as we went into last time, when you consider that Chavana creates Mada, the mead, and he also ends up being the figure who gives access to the Soma sacrifice itself. There are all these connections to the Soma sacrifice in Chavana. Then also, it seems that Chavana's wooing myth and marriage myth parallels the very myth of Soma's wedding in the Rig Veda 10.85 and Surya's bridal to Soma, where the Ashvins are said to be there as wooers, as go-between wooers, who then become groomsmen for him in his bridal. What happens in the Chavana story is the Ashvins show up, and they are actually rival wooers, more emphatically, and then it flips, and there's a happy ending where they become, supporters of Chavana and his marriage to Sukanya. That they were rivals. They were rivals at the beginning, and they become, happy supporters of them after the choosing test. And they heal Chavana. They help Chavana to heal, to renew his youth with their special healing herb and youth renewing herb. So you have all these elements similar, aligning with the Soma wedding myth. Why do the Ashvins appear right there as rival wooers and then supporting the marriage? And then you can read this theme of Chavana's eye being poked. That's how the story starts, is that Sukanya, there are two versions, one in the Mahabharata, one in the Shatapatha Brahmana, I believe. Yes, and in the Mahabharata version, Sukanya herself pokes Chavana in the eye, and that triggers the need for a recompense, where her father has to promise her to Chavana as wife to make up for this offense. And in the Shatapatha Brahmana version, it's actually playing youths who they're playing, and they're throwing clods of dirt, and they throw a clod of dirt at the eye of Chavana, and temporarily injure his eye. And this theme of the eye being poked out can be theoretically connected to eclipse imagery, the eye that is blinded, the divine eye. It seems that there is a possibility of this lunar significance of either a solar or lunar eclipse, and that would connect to the Soma concept as well, theoretically, that there could be something to do with some sort of eclipse. Why is this eye blinded? So that can align with Soma as well. And then, of course, we drew in Dionysus. Once you start to think and have this hypothesis that Chavana could be a Soma incarnation, then you look at Dionysus, the god of the sacred liquid in the Greek mythology, and he is clearly a Soma type. with the same sorts of associations to the bull, to his own essence, his own blood being the liquid itself, and all these other things. This complex, this paradoxical connection to the lunar and the solar, I think, is there in both. And then his birth myth, as we went into the birth myth of Dionysus, where he is in his mother's womb, and she asks Zeus, who was the father, she asks to see Zeus, and he reveals a part of himself to her, but the glory of Zeus is so powerful that she bursts into flames, causing the early birth of Dionysus, essentially. And Chavana specifically is an early birth caused by a demon who approaches his pregnant mother while she's pregnant. A demon comes and frightens her, and she gives birth, has an early birth of Chavana, who slips out of his mother's womb, which connects to his name. And when he comes out, the splendor and glory of Chavana causes the demon to burst into ash and into flames. So you have these same elements. At that point, you have we've triangulated a lot of evidence pointing to Chavana being this god of sacred liquid, actually. Okay, so hopefully the layers of that make sense. It's all a matter of triangulating and drawing these multiple strands together. There are multiple strands within the Vedic that have to be equated, the Rig Vedic hymn with the legend, and then also drawing that to the Greek Dionysus and that sort of thing. So then from there, you can go to the Celtic mythology, and I noted how Arawn seems to be in this position within the Rig Vedic hymn last time, where he's the Lord of the underworld, who he starts out this whole cycle. He's right there at the very beginning of the four branches of the Mabinogi. He's married to an unnamed wife, who then Puith, who seems to be in a Gandharvic role, comes and takes the place of Arawn, and takes his semblance and sleeps in the bed with his wife in this Gandharvic role. You can see that as potentially the Soma god Arawn, followed by the Puith, the Gandharvic god Puith, in this exact sequence that we see in the Rigvedic hymn. We then have Predu Anuin, so this poem of the raid on the underworld that Arthur apparently takes part in, and the cauldron of the underworld is stolen, is won or stolen by this raid to Anuin, the underworld, which of course Arawn is the Welsh lord of. So apparently Arawn is a keeper of a cauldron in the underworld that gets stolen. Is the upshot of that when you put those two pieces together, which makes sense in a lot of ways. And we have in the Irish mythology Midir, who has associations with certain mounds, certain, many gods are associated with many different mounds in Ireland. So it's a bit less clear who can be an underworld god. Is every single god who is associated with a mound an underworld god of some kind? Perhaps. So it's less clear who is the direct parallel of Arawn, I think. But I do think you can see that Dawn, the god Dawn or Down, he has his own island, and then he parallels Bendigeid Bran, who goes to the island of Gwales as a severed head at the conclusion of his story, and that seems to be that island of Gwales seems to parallel the island of Dawn. So I think you can set those aside as an equivalency, which we'll go into in the future. But it is Midir actually who has his cows and cauldron and special cauldron stolen from him in a raid by Cuchulainn, I believe. And so this is something that can connect them in a small but important preve. Okay, thank you. So preve anun, something like that. I'm not going to be able to pronounce these words, but thank you. I always appreciate trying to improve my pronunciation. So I'll put this up. And but yeah, you guys hopefully know the stories I'm talking about. And so we have Midir connected to a cauldron that he also has stolen from him, and cows. It seems like he was a keeper of sacred liquid in these symbolic pieces that are then also raided from him. We then have Midir's most famous story, which is the wooing of Etain. And coincidentally and uncannily, one of the more uncanny parallels we have, the wooing of Etain begins with quarreling youths, and they throw a split of hazel into the eye of Midir. So I mentioned that Chavana has he's begins his story, and he gets his eye poked either by Sukanya, the bride herself, the bride to be herself, or playing youths who throw a clod of dirt. Well, we have here in the wooing of Etain that that Midir begins his story having his eye poked out or badly, damaged by quarreling youths who throw a split of hazel, and it pokes him in the eye. So it's an uncanny, incredible similarity that can be the basis of this further comparison. So I'm going to just pull that up here if I can. Is there anything you'd like to add as I pause here, Arno?
Well, so there is a Baltic myth. It's where I believe the Balts have a myth about explaining the phases of the moon, where the sun and moon are created, and the moon god is pursuing the sun, and they end up getting together. But the moon is unfaithful to the sun and cheats on her with the morning star. And
Yes.
so Perkunas smashes him in the face and separates his face into many pieces, which is like the phases of the moon. I have no
Right.
idea if that would have anything to do with this eye poking.
Well, I kind of think it could. There's definitely a Baltic, and I haven't refreshed on the Baltic. I wasn't focusing on that for this stream today, but I know that 100% the basics of this myth are there in the Baltic fairly clearly. This thing, and even with the maiden, I think is referred to as the daughter of the sun. What is it? Solis something Duchter, daughter of the sun. So, if anyone knows the Baltic version of that, feel free to comment. But yes, definitely look at the whether it's Lithuanian or what was it that you saw, Arno?
Is that a Lithuanian or Latvian?
Right. Yeah. So there's something there that is a very good example of which I don't have handy right now, but thank you for bringing that up, and that is a good reference for anyone to look at. So we have here the wooing of Etain, right? And I'll just read from this. So then Midir came on that day to the brew on a visit to his fosterling, and he found the Macoch, that's Angus, of course, on the mound of She in Broga on the day of Samhain, with two companies of youth at play before him in the brew, and Elkvar on the mound of Claytech to the south, watching them. A quarrel broke out among the youths in the brew. Do not stir, said Midir to the Macoch, because of Elkvar, lest he come down to the plain. I will go myself to make peace between them. Thereupon Midir went, and it was not easy for him to part them. A split of holly was thrown at Midir as he was intervening, and it knocked one of his eyes out. Midir came to the Macoch with his eye in his hand, and said to him, Would that I had not come on a visit to thee, to be put to shame. For with this blemish I cannot behold the land I have come to, and the land I have left. I cannot return to it now. And so So we see then subsequently that Angus tries to convince Midir to stay and to have recompense for this. Midir demands the recompense that Midir demands is the maiden that surpasses all the maidens in Ireland in form. And so Angus then has to go with the help of others to try to find this maiden that Midir has seen, and ultimately Etain is brought, and Midir and Etain become married for a while, and other things go on from there, where he loses Etain. She's transformed into the famous fly, which seems to shed a liquid from her that has properties very comparable to the Soma itself. And ultimately, she flies into a drink and is drunk by a woman and reborn, not remembering her former life. And she marries a new husband who Midir then has to go win Etain back from her final husband. And in that final story, he essentially let's see, I believe he plays chess, of course, so that's the key thing. He plays chess with Yoki, her new husband, and he sort of baits Yoki and wins in the final round to take Etain back. But then ultimately Yoki comes back. There's a lot of back and forth, so it gets a bit confusing. But in the final part, Midir says that Yoki can have Etain back as his wife if Yoki can pick Etain out from a group of maidens who are in, let's see. Trying to find this exact passage here. Okay. So yeah, Midir appears and tells them that Yoki's wife will be restored to him the following day. The next day, 50 women who all look like Etain appear, and Yoki has to choose which one is his wife. So the important thing here is that there is a magical choosing test. All these maidens appear the same, and in order to conclude this whole back and forth, the correct maiden, the correct spouse has to be chosen out between them. Yoki, of course, chooses incorrectly in this story, and the conclusion is then that Midir keeps the true Etain as his wife. and so that union is solidified. Yoki accidentally chooses his own daughter, and it's a tragedy for him in that sense. But the key here is that all these things happen. The piercing of the eye, which then there has to be a recompense. The specific recompense is the giving of the hand of this most beautiful maiden. And then, interestingly, Angus is the Ashvin type. He specifically goes as the go-between wooer to find Etain. And as we see in the Soma hymn, the Ashvins are there as go-between wooers. The Ashvins then appear as this sort of rival wooer pair in the Chavana story, but then get transformed into supporting friends when the deal is struck between them, and when they win the choosing test. So it's interesting how they have these different roles. There's always a rival, like Yoki becomes the rival here of Midir in the choosing test. But yet also Angus is there as the go-between wooer. In the Chavana version, the Ashvins are that rival wooer, but then also become, the supporting groomsmen in a sense. And we have this concluding magical choosing test where one of the spouses has to be chosen between other potential, between others that are like them. Clearly, in the Ashvins and Chavana story, it's difficult to tell them apart. Just like in this version, it's hard to tell the maidens apart. And the outcome is that the correct pairing, the Soma type god and the sun princess, are married in the conclusion, even though things have been flipped around so that in this Gaelic version, the rival has to do the choosing and he loses in order to have that same outcome. So you can see the pieces being there, but just kind of being moved around slightly. But there are some very uncanny pieces. And this is kind of one of the points I also want to drive home, is that with this parallel, it's so complex, multifaceted, and even long. It's a long sequence, a chain of events. But it's amazing that they're all there in some capacity. And the key to this parallel working and being a true parallel does not rely on it always being the same figure who does the uncanny, the like key event thing. It doesn't always have to happen in the same way to the same deity. It's really, you can kind of start to see that these events are what matter the most. And then who does what shifts a little bit around it. If you can hold on to that idea, and then you can, I think, see how this manifests in the Norse version and elsewhere, because we again have this chain of events happening in a similar sequence, but who does what has slightly shifted once again. So should we just go straight to the Norse version, or do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, we can head over to it. Everything that I bring up comes from the Norse version and Gesta Danorum. So yeah, we can get into it.
Okay, perfect. And so again, the key things are an eye injury, an eye poking out, and tied to that eye poking is an immediate need for a recompense that involves this specific marriage that will end up being the Soma and Sun Princess marriage. And with that marriage, to conclude that happening, is a magical choosing test. So it's very coincidental when we look to Njordr, who again was the key parallel to Chavana and the Ashvins in the Iservanner War. We have this same sequence of events happening. Mainly, this is from Skald Skaparmal mainly, and with some parts appearing in other sources. But of course, the story of Njordr's marriage to Skadi First of all, what I find interesting is that that story begins with Bragi and Idun and their marriage, which there's not much info told about that, but you have, once again, Bragi, who seems to be the Gandharva, appearing at the beginning of this chain of events. One wedding, beginning at this chain of events. It's not in the same order, but that would be the Gandharvic marriage. So it seems like because it's tied to the Njordr event in a chain of happenings, that it is part of this lunar cycle, so to speak, just displaced to a different position, being the first marriage. So then Idun's apples are then stolen by Thjazi, and then Loki and them have to etc. and kill Thjazi. Thjazi is the father of Skavi, though, and so this is what leads into the next part of the story that's important, because the killing of Thjazi. And okay, the other detail that connects this, that's key, is that Idun's apples that we just mentioned are the the plant that renews the youth of the gods. That's exactly the plant that the Ashvins brought into the picture when they appeared in their story, and they brought it to give to Njordr to help renew. I mean, sorry, to give to Chavana to help renew his youth. An herbal paste they made out of herbs. So you have, again, these same elements strangely coming together, leading to this same sort of conclusion. So you had the apples of youth that was taken away from the gods to cause them to grow old, just as Chavana grew old in his story and had to have his youth renewed. Then Thjazi is killed. This enrages Skavi so that she demands a serious recompense. Okay, so this is that same inciting, aggravating action that leads to the exact same recompense, because one of the recompenses is the removal of Thjazi's eyes. And so I think this is the same poking out of eye metaphysical event that we see attached to Chavana and Midir, but it's been expressed in a different way. It's tied to the father instead. That is tied to the inciting event as well. It's specifically tied to the inciting event that requires recompense, but in this case, it is part of the recompense. Okay, so you can see this is a very close shift, but it makes it seem to be a different story until you put all of these events in a sequence and realize it's the same chain of events, just attached in two different figures in the drama. So then the other half of that recompense is that Skavi is promised to marry Njordr. This is part of the peacemaking treaty with Skavi, is that she is promised to wed Njordr as the recompense. So again, the sides who is being given recompense as flipped, but it results in the exact same final conclusion, which is this wedding as recompense. And in that wedding, Skavi gets to choose which husband, gets to choose her husband, but her sight is obscured, just as in the others. The vision of who she's choosing, it's a difficult test under a sort of magical obscuration, so that she can only see the feet of who she's going to choose, and she thinks she's choosing. I think she thinks she's choosing Baldur, right? Is that correct? And she actually chooses Njordr's feet. And I think it's funny because she chose Njordr's feet because they looked youthful and white because of, but it's because of the waters that Njordr was in had made them to look youthful and like Baldur's. So she thought she was choosing correctly, but she chose the wrong one. She was tricked. Interestingly, that's the conclusion of the Irish version, is that the person choosing is actually chooses wrong, and it's sort of a comic, tragicomic ending from their perspective, that they didn't choose who they wanted to. So that similar motif, but it's again connected to different figures. I also think it's interesting that Njordr's feet are associated with being in water that made them look youthful here. So it makes me wonder if that connects to Chavana has just emerged from the waters with the herbal paste, actually renewing his youth in his version. So he's just emerged from the waters, and then Sukanya has to try to choose him, and she chooses correctly. But so again, when you draw the Chavana version and the Norse version together, it is the bride, the female goddess, who is the chooser in both cases. So that is the same between them, except in the Chavana version, she chooses who she wants to. In the Norse version, it's a more ironic or tragicomic mistake that the chooser makes. But nonetheless, it results in the same pairing, arguably, because Njordr is the one in the Aesir Vanir War, the senior position of the Vanir, whereas Chavana is clearly the senior figure in the fight against Indra that has the same sort of elements. So it's an incredible amount of details once you align that with all the details from the Aesir Vanir War and the Mada Kvasir parallel. You align that to the apples being stolen and making the gods old, and then having to be brought back to renew their youths, just as Chavana grows old and his youth is renewed. All that sequence, and then all the details of the offense that has to be given recompense, which is tied itself to eye poking. It's like one unit, and then the other part of that recompense is the wedding, and that wedding ultimately involves a choosing test with vision obscured in some way, and different that can be told in different ways. But the outcome is that this what seems to be the Soma type weds the solar bride. And the other interesting thing is that there are other details you can look at with Skadi that show why she is probably this sun princess type. Her most famous epithet is the shining bride of the gods. That very much would summarize who Surya is in the Vedic story. She also, as I mentioned before, she is passed from Njordr to Odin in marriage. So after being wife of Njordr, she then becomes wife of Odin, and Odin, in one of his aspects, is the Agni type. So this would be potentially the remnant of that passing of the solar bride from between the Soma to the Agni, and then the Gandharvic marriage would be in a slightly different position with Bragi and Ivun, as I mentioned. But you still have those three marriages in sequence of this story, which I think is incredible as well.
I thought it was interesting. It seems as though there might be while Njordr's not the Gandharva type, he's while he and Skadi are married to one another, they just sleep by each other's sides. They don't really. There's nothing said that they have any children like she does with Odin later, um, and because they both sing in prose, lamenting living in the other's domain while the other is sleeping. So it's like these motifs are still there, but it's like not
Mhm.
always lined up
Yeah.
the same way. And even Thiazi's name is a Sami word that means water,
Hmm.
um,
Interesting.
which might have something to do with this god of vivifying waters losing his eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe there's a remnant of the role in Thiassi himself, because things could shift around. And I definitely had trouble positioning Thiassi. So in my book, that is one point of contention that was not fully clarified or successfully positioned here. But again, part of my contention is that these things clearly shifted around. And so the different branches were treating each figure slightly differently, but the same sort of key events in sequence is kind of what matters most, especially in this parallel. So also with Sukanya, she's like the granddaughter or great granddaughter of the sun. Therefore, Skadi doesn't have to be necessarily the daughter of the sun to still be this sun princess. So there are these sort of these points where things can be a little bit gray area, a little bit looser. She doesn't have to be Thiassi doesn't have to be the sun god himself. Perhaps the Norse just treated that parentage differently, entirely differently, or perhaps Skadi's grandfather or great grandfather would have been seen as the sun god. Those are open possibilities that would align that.
I'm kind of wondering now if this bright eyes of the lunar waters god, um, upon, usually leading up to the meeting of him and his solar bride, has anything to do with the light, the stars of the night sky being put out, so to speak, by the arrival of the sun, transitioning from night into day.
Hmm. It is Sukanya herself in one version who does the poking out. So that is definitely an interesting thought. And in terms of eclipse, it's a more irregular occurrence. So it would be hard to have eclipse be an anchor point of a cyclical myth in some ways. So perhaps it could be more tied to the sun. I think there's a lot of open space there for kind of guessing what it could be, especially since it has you see consistency where it is Midir and Chavana who seem to be the same figure. Their eyes are poked out, but then you have it shifted, quote unquote, or just told differently, where it's that motif is connected to Thiassi instead. Clearly, there's some leeway for it being treated differently or given different meanings, right? I do think there is the possibility that that Horus the Younger and the story with Osiris. So Osiris is like in the Dionysus position, as the ancients believed. Osiris just was the same as Dionysus, but Osiris is cut up into pieces similar to Kvasir, and then there is Horus the Younger, who then gets in a fight where I believe it's his eye gets poked out. And from what I've read, I don't have the reference right here, but that was connected to eclipse by perhaps ancient Egyptians or scholars. So that is something to look into, where there is this motif connected again to a different figure. Horus the Younger is more like he's closer to a Freyr, perhaps. So it would be like in the Egyptian version. Now Freyr is the one whose eye is poked out, but he is associated as like symbolic of the moon, of the lunar eclipse in that Egyptian version nonetheless. So a different figure can step in and be connected. So a lot of things that are not going to be 100% clear to us, I think, that we have to speculate about.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So let's see. What else? The other point to consider is, now when you have this strong hypothesis of Skadi being the shining bright of the gods, seems to be in the same role as Surya, you can then look at her iconography and also comment on that, because she is the hunter, skier, bow user, bow hunter. And so I think this can tell us that this combination of bow hunter and skiing had a solar meaning for the Norse. That's just my theory based on this. You can extrapolate. If it's true that she is in the Surya position, then there's no reason not to suggest that the bow that she uses is a solar symbol. And so that's how the Norse were expressing another image of her solar character. When you then look at Uller, which we can do at a later time, I think Uller is the sun god, and he has the exact same iconography as Skadi, as a bow hunter and skier. So that's something for the future, but these points reinforce one another, I think. When you identify independently that Uller is the sun god, and he has the same imagery as Skadi, it's an important thing to bring together with Skadi to say this imagery that she has probably was it had the meaning of solar power for the Norse. I think when you bring these multiple pieces together from different sides, that's the conclusion that I would suggest. And then The only other thing I wanted to touch on before we can go into hatting is this question of Njordr versus Dionysus. So I think people want to look at things kind of on the surface and look at the character, the sort of personality that the gods are depicted with in their myths in a given branch and draw them together. So for this reason, people see a lot of similarity between Dionysus and Odin. And we've kind of gone into that before. And it's not wrong that there is a shared sort of fury or inspiration connected to the sacred liquid between both of them. But there's also different roles. And I think this only relying on what how their personality is expressed in a given mythology can lead us astray if what we really want is to go to the root of what actually happened and what the actual shared root is. I think it's much stronger to look at these narratives, these full stories that are so complex with so many aligned pieces to tell us really how they're branching off from a shared root. When you have that established, I think it's easier to see that a different branch may express the personality traits a bit differently. So Njordr, we don't have that much mythology really about how he acted and that sort of thing. We have some, of course, but he, if you look at the Wikipedia picture of him, he looks a bit gloomy. He looks a bit, he's in an unhappy marriage with Skathi, who didn't mean to choose him, and they have different likes, and they want to live in different places. It's a bit of a bummer, and he's not connected with dancing wild women in his stories that we have. So these sort of things make them seem very different, but I think you got to draw back to these stories and just envision how different branches are going to express the outward personality a bit differently based on what they focused on. And also the other thing is that one of the keys is the connection to the waters themselves. That's one of the core, when you kind of drill down to their traits and their associations outside of this story sequence. Dionysus is, in the Greek mythology, Dionysus is identified with all moisture or all waters. So that is part of his nature, and he is the embodiment of the sacred liquid. Njordr is the lord of the waters, right? He's the lord of the sea in some sense. So I think this is sort of the foundational overlap that they shared at their root. And when you go to Soma himself in the Rig Veda, that trait is very, very much repeated. And let me see if I can just read a couple passages from the Rig Veda to drive that point home. This idea that Soma, the god Soma, his main thing is that he embodies or controls the waters that are connected to oceans, that are connected to the waters in the moon, and all of this sort of thing. So we have from Rig Veda 9.2.4, quote, "The mighty waters, yea, the floods, accompany thee, mighty one," and that's to Soma. "The lake is brightened in the floods. Soma, our friend, this god dives into waters and bestows rich gifts upon the worshipper." Okay, what else? From 9.22.7, quote, "Thou, Soma, boldest wealth in kind, which thou hast seized from churls." So that is relating him to wealth. He's a god of wealth, which is one of the main surviving associations of Njordr as well. He's called Soma, Lord of Wealth, in 9.29.3. And then, quote, from 9.33.6, quote, "From every side, O Soma, for our profit, pour thou forth 4 seas full of riches thousandfold," unquote. And quote, "Pour forth on us abundant wealth, O Pavamana, with thy stream, wherewith thou mayest find us light. O Indu, swayer of the sea, shaker of all things, flow thou on, bearer of wealth to us with might," unquote. That's from 9.35. Okay, so hopefully you get the point. He's repeatedly connected to wealth and waters, even the sea, and swaying the sea, like I just said. And here's one last one, uh, or here's two last ones. Pour forth the food that streams with milk, increase the sea that merits laud. That's from 9.61. And then, quote, Soma who rainest gifts, may we win riches with our hero sons. Unquote. So, okay, you get the point there. And Mircea Eliade, as I note in my book, says, quote, the organic connection between the moon and vegetation is so strong that a very large number of fertility gods are also divinities of the moon. And in almost all the gods of vegetation, there persist lunar attributes or powers, even when their divine form has become completely autonomous. And so that connects to Njordr having power over the wealth of the sea and the land, as it says in his descriptions in the Eddas. Njordr actually, why does Njordr have power over wealth of the sea and the land? It's because these vegetative powers of the lunar god are there, and we see them even in Soma himself. Okay, so hopefully that makes a bit of sense. Drawing them together in their largest circle of overlap, is this having power over the waters, because that they are really the god of the waters, and it is the waters of fertility, as we see clearly with Njordr and the wealth of the sea and land. But also connected to, esoterically, it is the sacred waters that also connect to the moon and the lunar side. Okay, so in your opinion, is this Soma type god the personification of the moon, or the personification of the moon's power over the earth? That's a great question, and it's one that I mentioned last time that I kind of leave open-ended, and it's sort of hanging there in the background in my book when I talk about this, because it's very hard to determine. When I see Midir and Chavana both having their eye poked out, that suggests a possible, that's Irish and Vedic stories going back to Proto-Indo-European, potentially, with this motif connected to them. And so that makes me wonder, is that the eclipse of the moon, as we see in the Egyptian version suggests that. And then Midir's name, it comes from, I believe, Proto-Indo-European, like meh, M-E-H, and this is in my book, so please double check the exact root. But it comes from a word meaning to measure. And there is a synonym in Proto-Indo-European, a synonym root meaning to measure. I think the difference is M-E-H versus M-E-Y or something like that. They're near identical phonetically, but they're different. And they both mean to measure. I don't know the exact relationship between these roots, but the point is that second root connects to the meaning of to measure, and the moon is treated as the measurer. The sort of esoteric meaning of the moon is that it measures the days, the months, and let's see if I can find the exact root so I can say something more specific. So yeah, Midir, it seems to mean to judge in Gaelic language, but going back to, again, the Proto-Indo-European root, it comes from MED, so I apologize, to measure. So it comes from a perfect synonym of the root of an aforementioned word for moon. So the word for moon in Sanskrit comes from MEH, subscript 1, NSS, which probably comes from MEH, meaning to measure. Okay, so that's very complicated. I've written this out on page 166 of my book with more specific detail, so I don't misspeak right now. But the word for moon in Sanskrit comes from Proto-Indo-European MEH, subscript 1, NSS, probably coming from MEH, subscript 1. meaning to measure. Midir comes from an Proto-Indo-European med, meaning also to measure. Okay, point is, it seems that Midir's name comes from a word meaning to measure, and that is a concept you see connected with the moon, even in Sanskrit, as the measurer. So this is nothing extremely solid to show that he is a moon god, but he is, for some reason, he's the measurer god etymologically, and that is a moon concept. He has his eye poked in a what seems to be a eclipse type esoteric meaning. Yeah, it's a very good question, because in the Vedas, in Vedic scholarship, it seems that scholars are not ready to say that Soma in the Rig Veda was the moon yet. That only later, or at least in the later part of the Rig Veda, he was becoming conflated with Chandra, the moon itself, and then later they're sort of treated as one. But that doesn't mean that's exactly what happened. It could have been that all along Soma was the moon esoterically, or the power of the moon, as you say. Or what makes the most sense to me is like Lord of the waters, of the sacred waters that were seen as having their source in the moon. So the moon is sort of pictured as, a container of waters, and those were the sacred waters of Soma. And so he's the Lord of those waters. Therefore, he's overlapped as sort of the Lord of the moon in that sense, yet can be seen separate. The one issue, of course, is Dionysus has more treatment, I think, as an esoteric solar god. But as we discussed last time, he's sort of paradoxical and has moon associations. Eliade goes into how the bull symbolism, the vine symbolism, and the snake symbolism, which are connected to Dionysus, are lunar more so than solar. So those suggest lunar powers of vegetation. And then the waters themselves, in worldwide esotericism, waters are more so lunar than solar, and the solar enters the waters and creates this duality of solar and lunar. And that really, if you really want to drill down to what is the meaning of this marriage in the first place, and what might have been the core of this marriage, I don't see how you get around. I don't see how you can get too much around the idea that this seems like it was the marriage of the sun princess with a lunar deity. Like the marriage of sun and moon seems to be underlying why this is happening and important in the first place. I could be wrong on that, because as I said, Dionysus is a bit difficult to see as only a moon god, but maybe underlying there was that lunar aspect still understood. Okay, so in the Rig Veda, it is said that Surya purifies the Soma. So I think this marriage of Surya, the bride, and Soma, it's like marriage of sun and moon, and that sunlight, that sunbeam goddess, somehow is causing a purification of those sacred waters by this marriage, by this union. This has to happen to bring this all about and perfect the sacred waters, purify them, what have you. And that was part of festivals, part of the underlying meaning of marriage rituals, and part of the underlying meaning of Soma rituals themselves, probably, and all of that. So there has to be something meaningful under there. So it's an open-ended question. Did you have something you wanted to add to my rant?
Yeah, well, so it first of all, I believe Josephus, if he could be here, would talk about how Dionysus in places, I don't know which mystery cults or if it's alchemists that talk about this being the underwater sun specifically, which itself is kind of a lunar, poetic way that you would describe the moon.
Mm-hmm.
But the moon itself, we know today with modern science, is directly related to the tides and currents of water moving around, and everything in Gylfaginning and elsewhere in the Eddas, the natural phenomenon that Njordr is credited as having power over, directly affects currents and tides of the waters, which the Scandinavians would mostly prey to. The wealth from the waters they preyed for was for fish. And I have no idea if this would be any sort of parallel, but it seems this wealth from the waters, or this wealth of liquid from this god, was usually fermented. Well, Scandinavians famously ferment fish into lutefisk, which everybody thinks is pretty nasty. But yeah, so it makes a lot of sense that whether or not he's the moon itself, this sort of lunar waters deity
Mhm.
is directly associated with vegetation and waters and the wealth of the waters and the vegetation. But even so, the waters and the mead or sacred liquid are often interchangeable in the
Mhm.
Rig Veda, and I think we kind of see this in the Norse pantheon. So you have Soma being named after the sacred drink itself, or vice versa. Um, but then you have who would the goddess of the waters be? Saraswati. Her name means possessor of waters. Norse parallels Gunnlod, who possesses the mead that Odin has to steal it from. He seduces her and steals it, whereas Njordr is instead described as god of water. So you have like this kind of flip flop that happens, at least with like surface level identification in these two different pantheons.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think everything's there. It's just you got to do a bit more digging.
Yeah.
And also, Njordr and Dionysus, while they're sort of different myths, they're both gods who are taken hostage. Um,
Mhm.
but beyond
Yeah.
that, I think we can probably move on to heading.
Yeah, good point. I'll just read this comment. Oh wait, no, sorry. What was the? There was a good comment here. Iberian Celtic wedding rite was a veiled woman choosing her husband from a swarm of suitors, with a libation as the symbol to seal her choice. Greeks recorded it in their colonial records. So I haven't seen that before, but that, to me, could very well be, yeah, a survival of this choosing test. It sounds just like it, right? So one of the points, yeah, that I want to drive home is that we see in the Vedic version that this myth, it does underlie the meanings um, that come through in their marriage rites, and so it's very possible that was true in other branches too. That this pairing was sort of an archetypal marriage that the bride and groom stepped into, but that again can change in different branches. Uh, depending what they do over time. So those things don't always stay the same. But we see that it might have expressed itself. This same mythos might have been coming through in even the Iberian Celtic wedding rite. So I think that's an amazing piece there. So okay, so yeah, you wanted to touch on this idea that so going into more legendary figures in the Norse, just like Chavana actually is, he's like a euhemerized incarnation, but he's there among the gods. It's very odd, and I'm not quite sure why it went that way. But it seems too obvious that he is a god in disguise. He's paralleling gods in his myth, and has this role. Um, but that's just the gray area of how these stories work. Sometimes there's a gray area between uh, how much a figure was myth versus humanized legend. But we have these legendary figures in Norse material, Germanic material, the sagas, where seemingly human heroes are incarnating myths and deities. So, what do you have to say about this possibility in that material you looked at?
Yeah, so in the same way that you're describing Chavana as like almost impossible to deny as a human incarnation of a god, and specifically the Soma god, there's a character in Gesta Danorum whom people have already seen as like kind of undeniable parallel to Njord, including George Dumézil. And that would be Heading or Hedingus, who he becomes a king of Denmark, but his birth myth and then his sort of his second wife or second consort that he has sort of matches this choosing ceremony with Midir, with Chavana, and I think his birth myth is an even closer parallel to Chavana's than even Dionysus's, but they're both pretty close. Yeah, so you see like Hadding, and her name is Ragnhild. I don't know if I'd be able to share my screen. I have this section pulled up on a wiki source. So I just press present here and share screen. Okay. Okay, there we go. Should be sharing this now, is that right? Are you
I'm
seeing
gonna
this
I'm
on the
gonna add
screen?
it to stage now. Okay, ready?
Okay, yep.
Okay, I've got to remove the other one. Sorry. There you go.
Yep. So there is some story before this that I haven't like sifted through entirely, but it seems like there's some kind of crimes or things that are happening that kind of play into that same like recompense that leads to the choosing ceremony. But this paragraph right here, and I see I've highlighted Ragnhild, talks about. I'll just read through it. Having chanced to hear that a certain giant had taken in troth Ragnhild, daughter of Håkon, king of the Netherians, and, loathing so ignominious a state of affairs, and utterly abominating the destined union, he forestalled the marriage by noble daring. For he went to Norway and overcame by arms him that was so foul a lover for a princess. For he thought so much more of valor than of ease, that though he was free to enjoy all the pleasures of a king, he accounted it sweeter than any delight to repel the wrongs done, not only to himself, but to others. The maiden, not knowing him, ministered with healing tendance to the man that had done her kindness and was bruised with many wounds. And in order that lapse of time might not make her forget him, she shut up a ring in his wound, and thus left a mark on his leg. Afterwards, her father granted her freedom to choose her own husband. So when the young men were assembled at banquet, she went along them and felt their bodies carefully, searching for the tokens she had stored up long ago. All the rest she rejected, but adding she discovered by the sign of that secret ring that was embedded in his leg, hint, hint. And she embraced him and gave herself to be the wife of him who had not suffered a giant to win her in marriage. Um, so this is a pretty clear, like, choosing the heading or Njordr amongst other men by judging by their feet or their legs. And then he does eventually later uh, complain about being with her and away from his home by the sea in prose, which I don't have here, but I won't read because that's essentially all there is to it. Um,
But just like Northern, and just like
just like
Scotty,
Northern,
rather.
yes, or
Yeah.
yeah, just like with Northern and Scotty. Um, and Dumazil even recognized that the entire story of Hadding, he sort of ascends all of the functions, beginning from the third, second, and then first function when he ends up as king of Denmark.
Mm,
He ends up as this like Odinic warrior who ends up hanging himself in front of his
right.
people, which
Right.
is kind of similar.
I was gonna ask you about that. I thought I remembered him saying he was like trifunctional. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. Um, but I think it's kind of insane that she was able to recognize him by a ring that she sewed like into his leg, kind of like how Dionysus was sewn into Zeus's leg to finish gestation. Because I never thought that Skadi choosing Njordr based on his youthful legs had anything to do with Dionysus being gestated in Zeus's leg, but maybe there's something there.
That's a good point.
Um, and then, so let me.
Yeah, sewing something into the leg just happens to pop up in this mythos. It's a lot of coincidences.
Yeah, and if I can use this find on page tool, which is very um, handy here, I can probably pull up his birth myth, um, which I think is like probably a bit closer with some differences than to even due to Chavana than even Dionysus's birth. So there we
Right.
go. Yeah. Son of Graham. Yeah. So Hadding is the son of Graham. Graham had so Graham and this queen or princess named Signy. have Guthorm and Hadding together. But Graham abducts Signy from. She was already betrothed to a king of Saxony named Henry. Graham abducts her. They have these two children. Then there is a character named Swipdog who slays Graham. And if we don't know, about the other Germanic legendary heroes, which gods that they're like euhemeristic versions of, nothing really sticks out here except Swipdog. This is another parallel that people have theorized quite a bit, is a version of another Germanic sun god named Other, the husband of Freya. So you have, instead of the infant Chavana or Zeus shining like the sun and burning, either like simile or in Chavana's case, his mother's abductee, to ash, you have a hero as the incarnation of a sun god slaying his father, who is the abductee of his mother. In Chavana's version, the previous marriage that his mother is abducted from is the union he was born from.
Right.
So there's a little bit of a difference there.
Right.
So this is really interesting. You don't really have, so there's something in the Greek and Hindu versions that pops up, something about like a god being forced to reveal the truth. In Chavana's case, it's Agni. So Puloma was betrothed to Puloman, a Rakshasa, which is kind of like a berserker. When he's in the house, Brigu is going to get firewood. Puloman shows up to abduct Puloma and claim her as his wife. And he doesn't yet know that she's already married to Brigu, the sage. But Agni is like put in a position where he's forced to reveal that truth to Puloman, whereas Hera sort of disguises herself and makes Semele very curious about Zeus's true nature, where he's forced to reveal his true nature, and then she burns the ash.
Right.
But I don't see something like that occurring in Headings. But that's probably because Saxo he probably wasn't copying poetry itself, but like maybe summarizing it in some ways. I'm not really sure if that's true.
True.
But yeah, I think Headings
Yeah,
is
that's
probably
it's fascinating. It's just it tells us how kind of ingrained this motif was, and there may have been variants of this myth, and is just already ingrained in in the legendary stratum of stories, which sometimes can tell us about. It's hard to know what that tells us, but it could tell us about how deep these traditions go, and how important, especially these specific patterns were. And again, it's connected to this important marriage. So the marriage element is there with the choosing test, and the birth. It reinforces that birth parallel between Chavana and Dionysus, and brings it back over to Njordr. And yes, everything just kind of keeps reinforcing as we bring more together.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of wondering that, like, you've been thinking about the eclipse that you mentioned, and I'm wondering. So every time that there's like suitors named, I'm not really sure about in Middir's case, but in the Nordic version and in the Hindu version, Skavi's trying to pick Balder, doesn't. Sukanya is choosing the rejuvenated Chavana between him and the two Ushvins. These Balder and the Ushvins, I wouldn't say they're equated like one of our friends
No.
thinks so,
No.
but they have very, very strong solar natures. And the horse twins, I think there are some sort of like stars in
Well,
the sky.
yes. Yeah, that's true. The Ashvins are vaguely alluded to be like the sages in the Vedas aren't even clear. Uh, the scholars think that the kind of idea was even vague to them, at least from what they can read from the sources. But there is some association with the morning slash evening star um, that is inconsistently tied. So again, there can be multiple gods connected to a certain star or a certain phenomena. They could be connected in different ways, just like we have Chandra is like the moon itself. Soma is like the waters, the sacred waters, which are in the moon, but are also elsewhere, intersecting. There could be something similar with the light of the morning star, or of morning itself, or something connecting
Yeah,
to
I
the
was
ashram.
thinking though, like these morning stars, they
Mhm.
don't like they never overlap or come together with the sun in the same way the sun does with the moon during eclipses. So maybe that was some kind of mythic or poetic way of like describing that celestial event.
Mhm.
Well, that's just speculation.
Yeah, yeah, that could be. Yeah, there's a lot of space for theories, I think, here. And one thing that's interesting is that Balder and the Ashvins both sort of are emblems of youthful beauty in both, or, youthful male beauty, and yeah, that's very much the case for the Ashvins. So they are playing that role in the myth that is specifically about that. They have the one being chosen, the Soma type, is being set up side by side with these embodiments of youthful male beauty, and they are the ones, and it is the Soma who wins the test for, or whatever, it gets chosen against them. So yeah, they could be different gods, but in a similar role that has that. They're just standing in for that. Um, but also there could be overlap between the Ashvin and Balder mythos. I know some people uh, see that happening sometimes, and there is also one interesting thing is that the rival that has to do the choosing test in the story of Midir is called Yohu. And in this story, okay, the Wooing of Etain is a very complex story. Actually, it's quite long, and I haven't reviewed the entire story, as you guys can probably tell. But there is a lot of back and forth and changing of hands of Etain. So there is Yoku Irem. Yoku Irem, or Arem, Airem, meaning the plowman. He played an important role in the Wooing of Etain. When Yoku invited the men of Ireland to the festival of Tara, they refused to attend for a king who had no queen, so he saw Etain and married her. However, Yoku's brother, Alil Angubai, also fell in love with her and wasted away with unrequited desire. So Yoku left Tara on a tour, leaving Etain with the dying Alil, who told Etain that the cause of his sickness was, which he said would be cured if she gave the word, meaning, had a tryst with him or whatever. She told him she wanted him to be well, and he began to get better, but said the cure would be complete only if she agreed to meet him on the hill, so as not to shame the king in his own house. So she agreed to do so 3 times, but each time she went to meet with him, she in fact met Midir, who had put Alil to sleep and taken his appearance. So this is sort of something that happens in the middle of the story that I didn't mention before, because it's so many back and forths. It's a fascinating story. On the third occasion, Midir revealed his identity and told Etain who she really was, and she finally agreed to go with him, but only if Yoku agreed to let her go. Okay. So Yoku Irem, and then there's another. Okay, Yoku's brother.
Yohu is a birth name of brass, correct? I know many characters
Yeah,
are called
yeah,
Yohu, but
yeah. Yep, that's or it's yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it might be like Yok. It might be a different form of the name, but I'm not sure if that's even true because it could be in different places. It could be either one. I'd have to check. Okay, so this is what I was looking for. Yohu Irem, the plowman, has a brother Yohu Fevlech, the enduring. So there are two brothers named Yohu. Yohu means like horseman or like a king of some sort, a horse lord. Um, I found it curious that the rival who does the choosing and loses is named Horseman, and Ashvin means horse, horseman. It means what does it mean? Horsekeeper, horseman, something.
Yohud means horseman. I think Yohud
But
just
Ashvin,
means
though, yeah.
Oshvin. Yeah, I think
I mean, Ashva is horse, and in any case, they're similar names. So I always found that curious. I found that interesting. It could be nothing. It could be just different figures, a coincidence. But you have two brothers named Yohu here, and one of them is in this choosing test against Midir, where he loses out, but he's the chooser. And in the Vedic version, it is the Ashvins, whose name means horse, and so it's just another curious coincidence to look at, really, because who knows? But there's this possibility that that role of horseman god survived there, even though Angus appeared earlier. He's the real Ashvin parallel. He appeared earlier as the go-between wooer. So again, it's this. There is this couple of separate roles of the go-between wooer who helps the Soma type, and then the rival wooer. And the Ashvins can kind of ambivalently go switch between those, even in the Vedic tradition, it seems. In the Vedic hymn, they're more presented as the go-between wooers, and then in the Chavana story, they're like the rival wooers. So that's it's just an interesting thing to think about, I think. But yeah, I think that covers the main parallels. Is there anything else we wanted to touch on, or any questions anybody wanted to go into? There's so much. This is the longest section of the book, and also the most complicated, as you can probably see the difficulty of remembering all these details and layers of this parallel. But yeah.
I wondered if, like in Chavana's and Sukanya's choosing myth, so the Ushpins, Chavana tells Sukanya after she's confronted by the Ushpins, like, oh, they said this to me. And he's like, if they tell you again, ask them about like something about like them being imperfect in ways that
Mm-hmm.
Chavana isn't, but
Mm-hmm.
they're sort of focusing on how they're young and Chavana's old and decrepit. I'm wondering if like him being old and decrepit has something to do with like the moon nearing the end of its half of the cycle,
Mm-hmm.
while the morning stars, these solar, anything solar is just beginning. It's very young and new.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great. I think that's kind of what I say in my book. I kind of say that him getting old seems like um, the lunar cycle, and then it being renewed. It's possible. So it's hard to say because in the Norse version, all the gods suffer age due to the loss of the golden apples of Ivun, right? So it's not only Njordr who is affected by that aging. So that's something that doesn't align with that idea, right? But it seems like a possibility that's there with Chavana. Yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard for me to think there was no lunar cycle symbology in these little details that we see, such as the eye poking and the aging, or somewhere in there. It's hard for me to think there was nothing, but it's also hard to prove. But yeah, then the other thing that I go into is that this seems to be, and I don't know how much we can really go into it on our stream because it's a whole nother tangent. But this seems to be the mythos that underlies the Holy Grail legends for the most part, especially the story of Peredur in the Mabinogion, and then the story of Percival that is related to that story of Peredur. And Peredur, or Peredurus, appears to be a modification, a different version of the name Pryderi, who is the Welsh Angus, the Welsh Ashvin. And so ultimately, when you look at the whole arc of this Chavana story and everything, it is about, the first part, of course, is about Chavana more so and his marriage. But then he becomes the helper who then helps the Ashvins to gain their place in the Soma sacrifice, the sacrifice of the high gods, and therefore to gain the Soma for themselves and become, and in the conclusion, they become key priests in the Soma sacrifice as well. So they integrate, it's the lower representatives of the lower common people of society, rather than lower. It's just lower than the aristocracy, the common people, the producer caste, and the Ashvins are their representatives. They become integrated with the higher aristocratic sovereign gods in the sacrifice, and this is symbolic also of the society, the castes becoming united in a sense, and they become then key priests of the Soma itself. They become the Advaryus of the sacrifice. In order to join the sacrifice, as Arno alluded to, they have to ask a couple of questions, and one of them is given to them by Sukanya. Sukanya gives them this advice on how to join the sacrifice, and it is to ask the gods, the higher gods, in what way is your sacrifice imperfect, or something like that. So they point out that the sacrifice that is being done, the Soma sacrifice so far that is being done, is imperfect, and their explanation for the imperfection is that it is headless, it is lacking a head, and the Advaryu priest is the head of the sacrifice, and therefore they need to be included to become the head of the sacrifice. So they're pointing out that the sacrifice is not complete without them as the head to complete it, and they step into that role, and that helps them to win their place in the sacrifice, essentially. So that was curious because, of course, Percival is told by one of the female figures that he encounters on his quest that he forgot to ask a specific inciting question about the Grail procession that he sees. And the Grail procession, of course, could be the Soma sacrifice, or underlying this legend would be the European version of the Soma sacrifice. And he didn't ask the question that would incite, that would set in, that would allow him to step into his role with whatever's going on, right? And so this female tells him that he has to ask this Grail question: whom does the Grail serve, basically? And so I found this an interesting parallel, along with a lot of other points that I go into in my book, that there is this moment where the female has to tell this horse twin quester who comes from a lowly beginning. He has lost his identity. He doesn't know his identity, who his father is, his place. His mother has tried to keep him away from becoming a knight. He goes off, becomes a great knight, and finds this Grail procession. And then he is told to ask this question about the procession, which is whom does the Grail serve? So it's about the function of what is going on in the sacrifice, and who is and some sort of activity, and how it's working. and that somehow mystically, mysteriously allows him to become a keeper of the Grail in the conclusion. With other things that happen, of course, in some versions he becomes the keeper of the Grail after that, or he finds that his name was written on the bottom of the Grail. In maybe that's the von Eschenbach version. I'm not sure. But anyways, there are elaborations and different variants of that, which again, I can't go into all the details, but a similar alignment there where this lowly representative of a common people, he becomes a knight, which also the Ashvins, they are warriors, and Freyr is a warrior, all that. But he represents youthfulness, also the common people, but he finds this role that he is destined to step into in a way, and he sort of recognizes that his role is one of serving, like this concept of who the Grail serves, and the sort of unification of what's going on there. It's very mystical, very very hard to pin down in some ways, but it's odd that there's this sort of moment of raising a question that allows them to take their sort of destined position in unifying and becoming a priest of this this symbolic sacrifice. So. Is the Sun Maiden in other branches also the goddess of love? So Aphrodite or Freya or something? That is a good question, and it seems like with Aphrodite there is overlap of the Sun Maiden mythos in Aphrodite. I think because there is this wooing, this Aphrodite is, there are a bunch of prospective deities who are trying to court her and marry her, and in that sequence of events, Hermes, who is the Gandharva, gives his gift of his staff to Aphrodite to adorn her bedchamber. That seems like a remnant of the Gandharvic staff role, which is there in the marriage myth. So possibly there is a remnant of that, but in other ways, she seems less like the Sun Princess, and it's hard to tell. Hephaestus, the fire god, is her husband, and that is accurate to the hymn we saw, so that could be part of the overlap. But Hephaestus also marries one of the Graces, and I mentioned last time that the Graces seem to me more like the Sun Princess in like a triplified or multiple names. Sort of this Sun Princess specifically seems more like the Graces in some ways, because then Dionysus marries, Hermes marries one of the Graces, and Hephaestus marries one of the other ones. That to me looks like a remnant of the multiple marriages we've looked at in the lunar cycle specifically, but then Aphrodite is there overlapping, like I mentioned. So it's not entirely clean and clear in that way. And then in her other mythos, Aphrodite seems to parallel Svaha, which is the wife of Agni. So that should be the reason that Aphrodite is married to Hephaestus, should be that it's this other fire deity wife who is Svaha, connected to the essence of the sacrificial fire, or somehow connected to the power of sacrifice, and that sort of thing. And for some reason has connections to beauty, which it's hard to discern. I do know that I found that Svaha's son or something like that is like a god of beauty or something. So some sort of indirect connections. Yeah, that's a good question. I think also there's a lot of like influence, or some influence from maybe Near East or Mesopotamian things on even the Aphrodite cult. There's a lot of changing happening that we have to just accept, I think, on some points. What do you think, Arno?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of the times these comparisons are incredibly clear, like across like a. Sometimes you have the same puzzle pieces that are all there, but they get switched around
Mhm.
sometimes. So that makes me think like that it kind of goes back to like there's not just one deity of blank thing. Um, so like with the Slavic and Baltic folklore where you so it's the moon itself in this place instead of Njordr
Right.
or Soma himself.
Mhm.
But Brian M had an interesting comment talking about Breda, or I don't know how to pronounce the Scottish version,
Mm.
marrying both Bress and Angus. Uh, but that's more of like for an
Right, right. That's more of a dawn. So yeah, I think Brigid and Bríd um, is the dawn goddess. So it's important to differentiate between the dawn goddess and the sun princess. Okay, so it is possible there can be confusions that happen in certain stories, so that can't be ruled out. But they're kept pretty separate for the most part as well. And I think most likely, if Angus has this story in Scottish lore where he is the lover or husband of Bríd or Bridie, then that sounds more like when Freyr and Freya are connected romantically, right? Is that what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's Freyr is one of the people that Loki accuses Frey of sleeping with all of the dwarves and elves, king of Alfheim. And
Yeah,
their father Njorth pipes up and doesn't deny that and actually defends it. So
right, right,
yeah,
right.
you have,
So,
and then she's married to Other, who is the like poetic sun god. So yeah, it tracks across the board. But
yes, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So that could have just been more focused on in the in that Scottish version. But on the other hand, it's entirely possible a tradition could conflate the Sun Princess and the Dawn Goddess. Who knows? But anyways, in any case, yeah, I see Freya as the Brigid parallel, and so that would be the more likely connection there. But and
yeah,
she was married
the
to
ancients
Bress
that
because
were
she's married to Bress as well. Bress is like Surya, and that is the Dawn. That is Ushas's lover in the Vedas. Yeah, what were you saying?
the ancient people that we get a lot of this lore from that were passing it down, singing it, and then witnessing it in the sky or just in reality. So the dawn was something completely different in the sky than the sun itself. I mean, not completely
Brida.
different, but like
Thank you.
okay, so Brita, okay. Yeah, so that's something that's gets conflated a lot. Aphrodite's kind of tricky to look at because I
Yes.
think that she's very influenced by Inanna Ishtar.
Yeah, that's
Um,
the thing. I agree that that could have happened. So, 'cause there's clearly some like just shifting. It does seem like she has this partial sun princess role, I think. So yeah, it's hard for me to not see that Hermes moment as a sun princess moment, and it's just hard to say 100%. And this is a great point for Ariadne's connection with Aphrodite. There was a tomb of Ariadne in Crete in which it was placed in the center of a sacred grove called the Grove of Aphrodite Ariadne. So Ariadne, as we said, is like the clearest sun princess, Surya type for the Greeks because she's that wife of Dionysus. And what I'll also say on this is that along with her marriage to Dionysus, I believe it's on Ariadne's death that her eyes or something, that some part of her, or that she becomes stars in the sky or something like that. There's some motif with Ariadne where she becomes stars in the sky in some sense or something connected to her does, and that's what happens to Thiazi, of course. And that again, that's a could be a general vague motif, but it's just interesting. Another little piece that parallels between them of being made into stars in the sky, even though it's attached to a different figure, like we said, the sort of roles can shift. But it's just another thing to add in there that parallels. And then this could be one of the keys, like you say. I think Josephus has mentioned something like this, where Ariadne was equated with Aphrodite. I think he might have mentioned that either last time or previously. So that would make sense to me, that there was maybe just an understanding that they were connected or esoterically equated in some roles. So maybe that led to what we see with some of that overlap. And then could we say anything? So I think we'll probably try to go into that main difference if we get a chance to do a more full stream on those figures. But basically, the dawn goddess is her own thing, and she is the goddess of the dawn itself. She just has a specific mythos. And then the sun princess has a specific mythos where she is like the sun itself, or you could say the light of the sun, even more so. I think the sun princess is I call her like the sunbeam goddess, and sometimes it's like the effulgent light of the sun. So it's hard to pin those things down too, for sure. But a lot of times there's just like the male essence of the sun versus the female essence of the sun, and the ancients would have understood that more intuitively, probably.
Yeah, Dawn's usually the wife of a sun god or the sun god, and the sun goddess
Yeah.
is usually the daughter of the sun.
Yeah, great point. Excellent point. So yeah, the dawn goddess Ushas is the lover of Surya, the male sun in the Vedas, and that seems to express itself in various branches like Brigid and Bress, and like you said, the Scottish version as well. I think, or no, maybe you were pointing to the Irish version. Sorry for if I misunderstood that question. But and then Freya and Other seems to potentially be that pairing of.
Yeah, even Eos and Tithonus.
Yeah, and we can go into that stuff hopefully
Yeah,
in the future. But the point is, like Arno said, the dawn goddess is lover of the male sun. That is not the case of the sun princess, and that might be one reason why they're held apart pretty consistently. There's this. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to make the daughter of the sun the lover of the male sun. It becomes not what they want to express. Probably they're just different, separate mythos. Yeah.
going back to the Soma type though, I've been kind of curious, like the explanations behind, or maybe like reasons why he's either father or foster father of the horse twins.
Great point. So that's another key element. We're never going to be able to point out all the connections in this stream. There's always going to be things great connections we didn't remember. But so we will look at it hopefully in the future if we look at the horse twins. But Angus, it turns out, if you look at the Dream of Angus and Skirnir's Mall, the story of Freyr wooing Gerther, or Skirnir wooing Gerther for Freyr, they are extremely similar stories. So not only do you have the wooing tales of Njordr versus Midir, and also Chavana being very similar in this way that we've described, but then you also have the son of Njordr is Freyr. His wooing tale, Freyr's wooing tale, is extremely uncannily similar to Midir's foster son's wooing tale, that is Angus. So that's the key difference there. So Angus is the foster son, and his wooing tale parallels Freyr's in the Dream of Angus. And so this is a crucial thing to realize when I was studying this, is that if you just start with Angus and you say, okay, Angus's wooing tale parallels Freyr, they must be the same, which is true. Then you might look at, okay, who's Angus's father? That is canonically the Dagda. And so, okay, then is the Dagda equal to Njordr? But then that's a dead end that I found after a while. Like at first I thought that until I saw the rest of this picture, which is that, oh wait, Midir has this mythos connected to this type that Njordr also falls into. And Midir is the foster father of Angus. So all that's happened is that Angus really has two fathers. One of them is Midir, this type, but he's presented as the foster father. But what's interesting, and probably the key to this, to why this happened and how this could happen, is that Angus believes Midir is his real father until he comes of age. So his entire youth, Midir actually thinks that, Angus thinks that Midir is his real father. So it's that close of a parentage, where he could be treated as his real father until he comes of age, and then he's told that his true father was the Dagda. So the Dagda is like this father in the background that's his true secret father. Whereas in the mentions we have of Freyr in the poetic Edda, at least, he is, and I'm not sure, he might be probably elsewhere too. Freyr is son of Njordr, but there are two different times in the prose Edda where Snorri calls Freyr, calls Yngvi, which is the name of Freyr, Yngvi Freyr. He calls Yngvi Freyr the son of Odin, strangely. So he implies that Freyr, Snorri, and some people think he was just wrong, and he was, but Snorri has a massive amount of information that he was working with that we don't have. So we can't assume that he was just making that up. Why would he just insert that for no reason, when clearly there are references he would have looked at and had that say that Freyr is the son of Njordr. So I think there's this possibility, this open possibility, that Freyr also was seen to have like another father in the background who they saw as Odin. And so therefore there's the possibility that Freyr had two fathers, quote unquote. And anyways, there's even the possibility, which you can't really speculate this far, even though I suggest it, that in the deep past, maybe that Njordr's parentage of Freyr could have been seen as a foster parentage, or that there was a higher esoteric essence of Odin being like the deeper father, or something that would have brought these into alignment, because we have to think that they came from a shared root somehow, many thousands of years ago, right? So I don't know, it's something to think about. But nonetheless, you can align their parentages if you just accept that, okay, Midir is foster father of Angus. Angus is equivalent to Freyr, and Njordr is real father of Freyr. So there's just a slight discrepancy, but they're still there. And that reinforces this pattern, I think, when you understand that. But why? But then the question of why is a harder question, right? That's what you're asking, Arno, right? Why?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what do you do? You have any thoughts?
Well, about why, I mean, not necessarily just speculation. Sometimes thinking about like the difference between like a solar or celestial and lunar parentage, like he's fostered by the lunar parent until he realizes that he's really celestial or solar, but I don't really know. But there was something in the Welsh, in the Mabinogi, that caught my attention about. So Quick is really the father of Pryderi, but when he takes over for Arawn in his absence, he's said to like look like Arawn.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So like it's probably a bit of a stretch, but I mean, there seems to be some kind of remnant of.
Yeah, no, I had that same, I thought through that same possibility, that like, because Arawn is double with Puich, it's sort of like Arawn is foster, or like a second double of his own father. So it's overlapping with his father, clearly. And not to mention, well, okay, yeah, Pryderi isn't even alive at that point, so you can't say anything specifically, but they become co-lords of their domains together thereafter. So when Puich later has his son Pryderi, Arawn is he's around somewhere, but anyway, as his father's double, which is interesting. But there's not too much more other than Pryderi then gets actually fostered by Ternan and raised by Ternan, who is like seems to be the Varuna of that story, because he is like the lord of the raging sea. His epithet is Hliant or something like that. I can't pronounce it, but he's a sea lord, and yeah, if you position the whole cycle, it seems like that is happening at night, in the dead of night, which would also be the realm of the domain of the Varuna. So it seems possible that he's being fostered at night somehow, as the gods of the transition to morning. They're being fostered by the moon, who's also lord of night. So they have these in different places. They have a foster parent who is like connected to night. So maybe it connects to them being. It connects to the cycle where at night they have some different foster parent, but then they're truly, in their deep heart of hearts, they are celestial, solar, more so that in their essence they have a solar seed that from within them longs to go back to the heights, in the morning, and they, of course, part of the Ashvin story is to sort of reintegrate with the higher, to challenge the higher. Even Angus challenges the king of heaven or whatever, and is cast back down. There's part of the Ashvin's mythos is to try to take over the kingship as well, and be cast down, and that could be another morning star motif. It's possible. Anyways, it's hard to know. Right? The Ashvins seem to be sort of lunisolar in a way, combining the lunar and celestial solar, so that could have something to do with it as well. But it's hard to say.
Yeah, I don't really have much else
Yeah.
with that.
So yeah, if nobody has any other specific questions, please mention any questions if you'd like us to clarify anything. For the Grail quest, I would say maybe we could. I don't know. We probably won't get around to doing a stream on it, but we might, or maybe I'll make a video someday about the Grail itself. It seems like a good topic, although I have a lot of other videos I'm working on. So, but you can look at there's the piercing of the eye occurs in the story of Pryderi or Percival, and he pierces the eye of the opponent, who is the Red Knight, which seems more of a Thiazi kind of positioning, right? So that always made me think maybe there's a more Germanic substrate to that version of the story that was used, the sort of opponent, because the Red Knight has just stolen the cup, a golden cup, from Arthur and his court, and that has caused a kind of paralysis to all of them, a kind of withering paralysis, very similar to when the golden apples are stolen by Thiazi, right? It's like the same motif, and that golden cup has to be returned. To do that, I believe Percival, I think it's the Percival version, has to, although it could be Peredur, I would need to revisit that, has to pierce the eye of the Red Knight with his lance and get the cup back and save the day. So that would be like if Freyr was doing all that in the Norse version, right? Or Angus, which he doesn't do in the Norse version. So again, it's another shifting of the role, but the same sort of events. Then, interestingly, again, let's say Peredur / Percival, just for the sake of going through this right now, goes and encounters the Knight of the Tent. And what he does is he actually encounters the Knight of the Tent's wife. So there's this woman who is married to a knight who is away, and he tries to woo her in a sense, or get a kiss from her. So again, it is suddenly after doing these early events, he steps into being a rival wooer, just like the Ashvins do with Chavana, threatening this established marriage in a sort of lighthearted but also threatening way, as this next event that happens right after that. And so that's curious. That seems to be an established role of the horse twin, to be this alternate wooer. Then they go on. He goes on to encounter the Grail procession, and again have to ask a question to take his place in that. So you have really all of these elements. Once again, it's not just one or two things. He has to, in his Aesir Vanir War type motif, he has to challenge. So this must be the Percival version with Sir Kai. Sir Kai is, of course, the Indra type, the warrior of King Arthur's court, and he challenges and defeats King Arthur's best knight, which is Kai, who is literally the equivalent of Indra. It's all the pieces are there, really. And he overcomes him and then gets admitted into the knighthood of all of the knights, from a lowly beginning. And then he finds out that he is also to become, in whatever version it is, he's also to become this keeper of the Grail. So all these things that the Ashvins do, essentially, or the Ashvin type, it's all there. So that makes the Grail king himself seem to be Soma, in my opinion, even though some of these, it's arguable, some of these things are out of position, but it would seem like the keeper of the Soma is the Soma king, who is sort of in a decrepit state himself, similar to Chavana's state, similar to Chavana being one thing or another. And the Fisher King outside, his name is, in one version, is Peles, which some scholars have believed could be connected to Puich. And so the Fisher King, fishing as this, he's like the intermediary. He's out in front, and he's encountered first. So it makes the possibility that he's like the Gandharvic type, as a sort of fishing in the waters, which is interesting, like the Gandharva in the waters. I don't know. I go into some of these possibilities in my long article, long chapter as well. And then it goes back to, as well, this concept of, in the Shatapada Brahmana, Prajapati, he's the totality god. And the priest, the sort of seer, has to cause the Soma to ascend and like become concentrated, well up, whatever, esoterically, in the Prajapati, in this in one of the sacrifices in the Shatapada Brahmana. And after this step of causing the sort of concentration and bringing upward of the essence of the Soma, he then is able to retrieve it from Prajapati, who himself is Soma. So to me, that seems like the priest in that role is in this archetypal role of the priest Ashvin type. The Ashvin is the Advaryu priest, who carries the cups of the Soma in the ritual. And so it seems like that priest who causes the sort of the ascent of the Soma, so that it can be extracted, so that it can be received by this sort of seer priest who's like embodying the sort of quester, right? He's able to receive the Soma from that Prajapati / Soma. So this Prajapati who is himself the sacrifice. Prajapati is the sacrifice, and his other name is Soma. So I think that seems to be like the real core of the Grail King who is wounded, is this like Prajapati Soma, and his essence of Soma has to be sort of drawn out by the seer quester priest. And there's something there to consider. And that he is the sacrifice. The Ashvins say that the sacrifice is incomplete. So it's like the wounded Grail King that has to be healed in a way, because he himself is the sacrifice that has to be perfected and healed. by whatever whatever this priest, this new young priest, deity, whatever, has to bring to the sacrifice to perfect and heal it and cause it to cause the essence to be able to be brought out, cause the unification of lunar and solar, cause the unification of everything, the unification of the common people and the third caste and the first and second. All these things are brought together by this this Ashvin, or this Ashvin type, and so that is kind of underlying the Grail quest, seemingly. And you can read more about that in the chapter. It's tough to talk about this, as I've said, because so many details. It's really like 100 pages of the book or something, or more, probably 120 pages of the book going into this. So inevitably, some of that's going to be a bit heady and a bit confusing. Hopefully, you guys got something out of that, though. And Arno, any final comments or things you wanted to say, or any questions or anything?
No, not really. I mean,
okay.
There were some questions throughout here that we missed or skipped over or answered later, but some of them were kind of not really like relevant but deviating. But yeah, I think we're pretty good there.
Okay. All right. Well, I do have to get going as myself, as I've run out of time. And yeah, I'm glad we were able to do a couple of streams on this, because there's so much here. It's so incredible. I just find it incredible. When I was going through this the first time, I was just like, I hope that I can get this across to people. That was, I hope I can get how complicated this is across in a clear way, because, to me, it's just jaw dropping and mind blowing. And I wanted to be able to try to communicate some of that, because really, this is a massive portion of our mythology, because so much is connected to it, as we went into so many sequences of multiple sequences of weddings. It bears on the meaning of the ritual itself and the wedding ritual too, and all of that. So many deities' identities are tied up in it. So I hope I was able to communicate some of that. And please ask questions, if anything, if you want to discuss more, or there's anything that I can clarify, because I would love to clarify anything that I can. And I love talking about it as well. So thank you, Arno, for discussing again today and going through 2 streams of this with us. Yeah, thanks for being here. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you to everyone for watching and asking questions. Also want to thank my patrons for, supporting our ability to do this, and just being interested in this stuff. I really appreciate it. And I don't always comment on that in the streams, but I just wanted to say thanks today. I am very appreciative, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day, and hopefully we can see you next week if we have time. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do it next week, but I am planning to try. All right. Thank you and goodbye.
All right.